It's finally time to talk about environmental action. Now, we've reviewed so many things, and I want this part to be like a catalog. I'm just going to show you a bunch of possible things. And don't limit yourself to what I'm presenting. I hope that as these are presented, these different projects, these different actions, they can actually trigger some more ideas and open your creativity. So there are many possible projects touching energy, transportation, because people have to come to the church. They come in a certain way. We can have an influence on that. Food at the church. We're always eating at the church. Jesus gave us an example with the supper and the Eucharist. But then, there are potlucks and there's coffee and cookies and muffins and so food. Water. We use water. Let's think of reducing that impact. Cleaning products. How do we clean? The waste. So recycling, reducing, and finally grounds maintenance. So let's explore all of these. First one, energy. Now, the wardens can use an energy workbook for religious buildings. They can find this online. There are many versions. I particularly like the one by Kairos, which was made many years ago. But you can find other ones as well. And you can just follow, answer all of those questions. First, you make yourself a first assessment, work on some of the habits at the church and also some non-costly improvements, and then do another assessment 1 year later, and then find that the churches I've heard of that used it reduced from 10 to 15% without much effort. And 10 to 15% on the energy bill is actually a couple $1,000s. So that can go into the mission rather than be wasted. We can go with simple projects like changing the light bulbs, which will reduce the amount of electricity we're using, or bigger projects like insulation. Now, there's also money available usually now. It depends with the winds of politics, obviously, but you can go on the natural resources website, and if you're from another country, obviously there must be the equivalent, and find those grants, those incentives that are available, and you look. A church is an institution, so you look in that category. It can be on the federal level, on the provincial level. It could be more from a utilities company, particularly energy. So look into those. There might be something available, and look regularly, at least twice a year. Why not invite an expert, someone who knows this? So an expert on religious buildings that can produce a detailed report. So we want an energy audit or an environmental audit. Both are good. Usually it costs about $1,000. To invite that person, goes through all the rooms, inside, outside the church, takes a bunch of measurements, takes a bunch of notes. It can be something that can take, at least half a day, maybe even more. And once all of those observations are done, this expert will produce a report on what are the highlights of this building, its usage in energy, and all of these. And then, this is the interesting part, it'll go into the second part of the report will show what are the possibilities. What should be the priorities for this church? And what is the cost benefit for these different things? Insulation, solar panels. Sometimes it can be very simple, just putting some caulking around the windows. So this expert will be able to guide, and then it's much easier to take those decisions. And with these calculations of costs and benefits, well, that $1,000 will just evaporate into more savings afterwards. For energy, we can dream of bigger things like solar panels. Now, here's an interesting fact. Most of the older and traditional churches are oriented east-west. Okay, why? Well, symbolically, we always placed the altar on the eastern side. People sitting in the pews were facing east. And so, why east? Well, east is where the day starts, it's where the sun rises. So, symbolically, the Eucharist is done there because it's always new life. And then the door, the main entrance, is to the west. I also know this because I got married, and the time we got married was very late in the afternoon. And so when people came out, they were facing west with the sun slowly setting, and people were just squinting. We see that on the picture after I got married. So east on the side of the altar, west is where the main doors are. And so the church is east-west, which means that the roof, one of them is facing south and the other one is facing north. Well, the one on the south side is just perfect to collect some of that solar energy, transform it into electricity, and enable your church to save so much money on its electricity bill. So that is obviously something to be explored. The price of solar panels has just dropped in the past 10 years. It's amazing. It's something that's really feasible now. The other option is geothermal. So there's lots of heat in the earth that we can go get. It's even much more efficient than a heat pump to heat the building because that liquid is going into the soil and getting that warmth. It might be in the air minus 20 degrees Celsius outside, but in the soil it can still be +8, +5 degrees Celsius. So there's a lot of heat compared to the air outside to be gotten there. And then it goes through a system and then it's blown into the air of the building. I even know old buildings that were where there was geothermal installed, and it's usually a big win. Um, the, 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 the cost for electricity really goes down. So there should be incentives for that. Let's move on to eating now. So all the food we have. When we're looking at certifications, there are like three kinds. Local, try to buy local. Organic, vegetables and fruits, and then fair trade. And when you choose them, go in this order. Okay? Local is the most important. And I've heard these debates between is local or organic more important? Well, local is more important because the food needs to drive less to get to the point where it's being sold and eaten. And so much less greenhouse gases emitted. The fact that there's less time to transit means that they can be harvested later, so they're actually more nutritious. And you're supporting the local economy. And by supporting the local economy, that producer actually receives more than if he had to sell it somewhere else, which also means that if he has more income, he can eventually convert his farm into organic, which is probably what they want because there's a huge amount that would much prefer not to use pesticides and not to use synthetic fertilizers. So this is just a win-win. We start with local, and then if what we're looking for is not available, then we go to we try to choose organic. That'll probably come from farther away. Obviously, if it's local and organic, that's the best. And finally, fair trade. I hope you know what fair trade is. To put it simply, the producers in the South, as the years were going by, they were getting pressured to sell their production of, for example, coffee beans and cocoa. They had to sell it to, the price was just going down on the market. So they were kind of forced to sell their production, but they wouldn't get much income, so they couldn't send their kids to school anymore. When they were sick, they couldn't pay the fees for the hospital fees. And so obviously this was just condemning so many people to poverty. So fair trade just makes sure that there's a minimum price to respect these producers. Obviously, when we serve coffee, it doesn't change the color of the coffee if it's fair trade or not. So just indicating it. This was a poster that was done many years ago, and lots of churches put it next to their coffee machine. And so it's a reminder that the coffee people are drinking is fair trade coffee. And there's this cool passage from the Bible. Jesus said, "The worker deserves his wages," which just sums up exactly what fair trade is all about. Obviously, eliminating styrofoam cups would be the best idea as well. Reducing the amount of paper consumed at the church. That is like so important and so obvious for lots of green teams. That's usually like the first thing they put on the list. So a little reminder in emails and right next to the photocopier. Is it necessary to print? Do you really need to print this? We're trying to reduce trees being cut. So be careful with that. And then a section for recycling at the entrance of the church. Here's something that I've seen, which was really amazing. So there were all these different containers of things that people could bring to church, and it really worked. It was amazing. So people would come in, put their batteries. That was the first one on the left. Their used batteries. Then soda pop cans, the tabs, sorry. So they would throw that there. Then the little plastic thingies for bread fasteners. Then ink cartridges, and the last one were glasses, obviously. And so these things were being recycled, and the green team was in charge of, when the box was full to bring it at the proper place. I remember a reporter from the CBC who came, and when she saw that, she asked me, "Is this a new way to make offerings at church?" And so we both laughed. It's not exactly the point, but then again, maybe there should be some theological symbolism to the fact that we don't want to waste, but we want to reuse all of these God-given gifts. So this really had lots of success, and I do suggest you do that at your church. People will be quite satisfied. Still in this idea of recycling and reusing, on the left we have a bazaar that was organized in an Orthodox church in Montreal. It's their annual bazaar, but what's really interesting is that lots of people there were actually artists that would reuse some materials. And so that's for the artist side, and then other people were just selling old stuff that they had, and so it wouldn't go in a landfill. To the right, you have a thrift shop. So basically, I know lots of churches who have thrift shops, secondhand clothes shop. All of these things are not thrown out, but are being reused, reworn by other people. Composting. So rather than having all these food scraps that go to waste, well, to put them in a bin. Now, in a community setting, obviously you can't have a bin and then just in the little kitchen and expect that people are going to put them there and then magically it's going to be brought to the compost. Here's a trick that I've seen in a few places. If there's a kitchen at the church, well, there's also a fridge. And if the freezer part isn't too used, if there's space in it, well then people, let's say, someone is eating an apple, finishes the apple, has the apple core, well, can open the freezer and put the apple core in this little bin or little box inside the freezer, and that way it's not decomposing in the air of the kitchen in a communal space. You won't get any little flies and no scents. So that's a really good way to encourage people to compost, which won't disturb anyone. Also, little poster on the left, just to remind people what they can compost and what they shouldn't. Let's talk about transportation, because everyone gets to church in different ways. I've seen churches that have, these huge parking lots, or if the church doesn't have a big parking lot, well, then the cars are parked on all the streets that are all around, and the last people who get to church are parked really far away, have to walk a lot. So the first example up there, the bikes. I know of a church who said, well, yeah, okay, we've understood that people would like to come by bike, so they bought a bike rack, installed it, and there were only 6 spaces on that bike rack, and the following Sunday there were 6 bikes, it was full. And so they thought, okay, this is working, so we'll buy another bike rack. Bought a second one, it was full. They bought 2 more, and the 4 bike racks are still full to this day. It's pretty much the expression, build it and they will come. So that was really interesting to see that so many people were just waiting for a bike rack. And so now there are less cars that go to that church. Also, public transit can be the subway, metro, could be a bus. But it's really interesting to put it on the leaflet, the parish bulletin, and write, did you know that there's this bus that passes at a certain time? And that should be just part of the basic information on the parish bulletin. Also, I know of a church who had a bus passing right in front, but since it's on a Sunday, it would only pass once every hour. And when it passed 10 minutes after the beginning of the Mass. That was a huge problem, and obviously parishioners didn't want to use it. So the Green Team organized and sent a letter and asked that the time be moved. So rather than being 10 minutes after the beginning, would be 10 minutes before the beginning of Mass. And at least 10 people would take the bus. And so Public Transit Committee considered it. And then 4 months later, when they reviewed all of the schedules, they changed the schedule for that number bus, and they changed the time. So it did work. We should never underestimate the fact that what we're asking for might not come to be. We should at least try. The cleaning products that we use, obviously we should be smart about it in our choice. We should use eco-friendly products. That way, when it's rinsed and it goes into the drain, well, it eventually join a waterway. And, let's be sure that we're using proper products. We can even make it our own. There are a bunch of recipes that we can use. Cleaning the windows with 1 part vinegar, 4 parts water. It costs practically nothing, and the windows are very clean after that. And there are other recipes for other cleaning products. And why not organize a cleaning bee with lots of people and do a little workshop before to show them how to make eco-friendly products yourself, which don't cost much. So you show them how to do it, and then they take them, and then they start using them to clean the church together. The use of water as well. Do you have any faucets that are dripping? Do you have any toilets that are like running all the time? So there's a problem there. So basically, those have to be fixed. And if ever you're planning to redo the bathroom, the washroom, well then just make sure that when you're doing that, you're using uh, things that use less water, toilets that use less water. And finally, grounds maintenance. Now, this one comes at the end, but it's one of the most important for a certain fact that this is the one that bears witness to the rest of the neighborhood that your church is officially taking a stance on environment. This church is caring for the environment. We believe that God's creation needs our care. I remember going to New Brunswick, and there was this church that had a bunch of bird houses in the front on the trees. And I remember that before I could even hear the music inside the church, because the choir was practicing, I could hear the birds singing praises to God outside. It was marvelous to arrive at that church and hear those birds. You have a parking lot that's made with these alveoli of plastic, or some are made of concrete, and they have all these spaces, so there can be soil, and you can put seeds on them, and have low-growing vegetation that you never need to mow, and then you get a parking lot that is not as warm. It doesn't make this heat island effect in the summer, and then for the rest of the year, when the rain pours, well, it's not asphalt, which will just make a certain part flood and bring the water and put lots of pressure on the sewage system. This can be done in partnership with the city, and maybe get a little grant for it, because since you'll be helping out the sewer system, because the water will be seeping in the soil rather than putting that pressure, well, that will actually help the city. So that can be a partnership. And finally, well, community garden. I knew a church that had more than 40 lots like those, and what a person does is register and maybe pay an annual fee, and then can work those lots of land, and harvest at the end of summer, obviously. In some community gardens, the approach is different, where you just get in, you get involved as a volunteer, you weed out some plants and water them, and then when the harvest comes, well, you take a bit of it, but lots of the rest of the harvest actually goes to the needy, goes to where we hand out food to those who need. And obviously those who are benefiting from that, well, they're also invited to come to the garden and make connections with the other people. I hope all of these examples were inspiration to you. Like, maybe some of these felt like a checklist, like, oh yeah, we're doing that, this we could do better. And then other things were like, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, we could be doing this. Oh, it gives me an idea, we could be doing that. I hope it just gives thrust to the things you're doing, and it'll help you organize an action plan and decide the priorities. Where do you want to start? Where do you go from here? There's so much we can do to reduce the environmental footprint of our churches. And good luck to you.